My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 38 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I found out the man I had trusted for nearly half my life had been keeping a secret apartment downtown with another woman. Not a hotel room, not a few hidden messages, not one stupid mistake after too much wine and too little judgment. An apartment. A real place with a key, a lease, furniture, candles, yoga mats, spare clothes, and a woman whose name he had been saying in my kitchen for months like she was some kind of saint. Daniel Harper and I had been together since college. We never had the perfect love story, but I thought we had a real one. We had 2 children, Lucas 9 and Sophie 6. We had a house 20 minutes outside the city, a mortgage, school pickup schedules, dentist appointments, grocery lists on the fridge, and that quiet kind of partnership you build after years of knowing someone's coffee order, bad moods, and childhood wounds. Daniel worked as a freelance photographer, so his schedule had always been flexible. I worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, which meant my life ran on calendars, numbers, deadlines, and routine. I left the house at 8 every morning and came home around 6 every evening. Daniel was usually the one working from home, answering client emails between laundry loads and school runs. For years, I thought that made us balanced. Then, Kira Lawson entered our life. Daniel had always been interested in wellness, yoga, breathwork, meditation, herbal teas that tasted like boiled grass. He loved all of it. I was never into that world, but I respected that it helped him. When he said meditation made him calmer, I believed him. When he started eating plant-based meals and reading books about consciousness, I teased him gently, but cooked the lentils anyway. About 6 months ago, everything intensified. He began waking before sunrise to meditate for an hour in the living room. He stopped drinking coffee. He started talking about emotional frequency and ancestral blockages. And then he told me he had found an extraordinary spiritual teacher named Kira. According to Daniel, Kira had studied healing traditions in India and Tibet. She understood trauma. She understood male vulnerability. She understood how people carried pain in the body. He said she was helping him become more present, more conscious, more connected. At first, I was relieved. Daniel seemed happier, softer, more patient with the kids. He kissed my forehead while I cooked dinner. He held my hand in the car again. He looked at me sometimes, with an intensity I hadn't seen in years, and I thought maybe this spiritual chapter was bringing him back to himself. Then the session started getting longer. He would leave after dinner, around 7, and come home close to midnight. "It went deep tonight," he'd say, dropping his keys by the door. Kira says healing can't be rushed. When I asked where these sessions happened, he stayed vague. Downtown? Near the Arts District. At a small sanctuary space. A sanctuary. That was the word he used. Soon, his phone changed too. Daniel used to leave it anywhere, on the couch, in the kitchen, buried under the kids' homework. Suddenly, it went with him everywhere, even the bathroom. If I walked into the room while he was on his laptop, he would close it too quickly and smile too brightly. I asked him once, "Is everything okay?" He looked wounded, like I had accused him of something cruel. "I'm just going through something private, Claire. Spiritual growth requires space." So I gave him space. That was my first mistake. 2 months ago, Daniel told me he needed a private room for meditation. He said the house was too noisy. The children interrupted his focus. The energy of family life made it hard for him to fully surrender to the healing work Kira was guiding him through. I offered to convert the spare bedroom upstairs. He shook his head before I even finished the sentence. "It can't be here," he said. "Kira says I need separation from my daily identity. Husband, father, provider. Those roles are part of the block." I remember staring at him across the kitchen table, my hands still damp from washing dishes. "So, what exactly are you saying?" He hesitated, then said, "Maybe a small studio downtown. Just somewhere quiet. Somewhere sacred." It sounded extreme, expensive, unnecessary. But Daniel promised he would cover it with his freelance income. He said it would help him become a better man, a better partner, a better father. And because I loved him, because I wanted to believe the best in him, I agreed. Within a week, he found a studio apartment in the Arts District. He called it perfect. He said it had beautiful light, old wood floors, and the right energy. He bought cushions, incense, artwork, blankets, singing bowls. Every time I asked to see it, he had a reason I couldn't. "It's not ready yet." Kira says the space needs to settle. It has to remain energetically protected for the first few months. Looking back, the excuses sound ridiculous. At the time, I convinced myself love meant trust. Then came the Saturday that cracked my life open. The kids were at my parents' house for the weekend. Daniel said he was going to the studio for an intensive spiritual practice Kira had recommended. He kissed me before he left, warm and distracted, smelling faintly of cedarwood oil. After he was gone, I made tea. His favorite tea, actually. Chamomile with honey and lemon. I thought I would surprise him, bring it downtown, maybe finally see the studio. Maybe take him to lunch afterward? When I reached the arts district, I called him. Straight to voicemail. I tried again 10 minutes later. Voicemail. After nearly an hour, I started driving slowly through the residential streets near the arts district, feeling foolish and strangely nervous. Then I saw his car, parked in front of a brownstone building with black railings and flower boxes under the second-floor windows. My heart lifted at first. I parked behind him, grabbed the tea, and walked toward the building. There was a directory near the front entrance. 8 apartments. No names I recognized. Then I heard laughter. Daniel's laughter. Not the polite laugh he used with clients. Not the tired laugh he gave the kids when they made terrible jokes. This was light, young, breathless. The kind of laugh I remembered from college, when he used to look at me like I was the only person in the room. I looked up. One of the second-floor windows was open. I couldn't see much, just movement, shadows, a curtain shifting in the breeze. Then I heard a woman's voice. Soft. Familiar only because I had heard her name so many times. Kiera. Daniel said something I couldn't make out, and they both laughed again. My fingers tightened around the paper cup of tea until the lid bent. This didn't sound like meditation. It didn't sound like healing. It sounded intimate, ordinary, private in a way that made me feel like I was the intruder. I called his phone again. This time, I heard it ringing from inside the apartment. Then Daniel's voice floated down through the open window. I need to turn that off. I'm supposed to be unreachable during practice. The tea slipped from my hand and hit the sidewalk. I don't remember walking back to my car. I only remember sitting behind the wheel, staring at the brownstone until the bricks blurred through my tears. For 1 hour, I sat there. Part of me wanted to storm upstairs and pound on every door until Daniel opened one. Another part of me was still trying to protect him, protect us, inventing explanations that didn't hurt so much. Maybe Kira really was just a teacher. Maybe they were discussing trauma. Maybe I had misunderstood the laughter. But deep down, something inside me had already gone cold. When Daniel came home that evening, he was glowing. He told me he had experienced a breakthrough. He said Kira had guided him through a powerful release. He said he felt lighter than he had in years. I stood in the kitchen, watching the man I loved lie to my face, with honey still in his voice. And for the first time in 12 years, I was afraid of how easily he could do it. The next few days felt like living inside a house where the walls had shifted half an inch overnight. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt stable anymore. Daniel still made coffee every morning, though now it was some herbal mushroom blend Kira recommended. He still packed Lucas's lunch, with the crusts cut off exactly the way our son liked. He still kissed Sophie goodnight and checked for monsters under her bed. And every time I watched him do those ordinary things, I felt sick. Because somewhere between school pickups and grocery shopping, my boyfriend had built another life with another woman. I barely slept that week. Every time Daniel's phone buzzed, my chest tightened. Every time he smiled down at a message, I wondered if it was her. My mind replayed the sound of their laughter over and over until it became unbearable. Still, I said nothing. Partly because I was scared of being wrong. Partly because I was terrified I was right. Instead, I started watching him more carefully. And once I started noticing things, I couldn't stop. Daniel had begun dressing differently for his meditation sessions. Not dramatically, but enough that it stood out once I paid attention. His yoga clothes suddenly looked newer, more fitted. He spent extra time fixing his hair before leaving the house. Sometimes he wore cologne, something woodsy and expensive I hadn't bought him. Who wears cologne to meditate alone? Packages also started arriving almost daily. He would rush upstairs with them before I could glance at the labels. When I asked, he said they were spiritual supplies. Books, oils, healing tools. But one afternoon, while bringing laundry upstairs, I saw an opened package on his office chair. Inside was a crisp black button-up shirt still wrapped in tissue paper. Not exactly meditation wear. The worst part wasn't the suspicion. It was the guilt. Daniel actually seemed happier these past few months, more alive, more affectionate with me. Sometimes he wrapped his arms around me while I cooked dinner and rested his chin on my shoulder like he used to years ago. It made me question my own instincts. Maybe this spiritual thing really had changed him for the better. Maybe I was paranoid because I felt disconnected from a part of his life I didn't understand. But then I would remember, standing outside that brownstone, hearing him laugh with another woman while he ignored my calls. And the doubt would harden all over again. After 8 days of driving myself insane, I finally admitted something to myself I had been avoiding. I didn't need reassurance anymore. I needed the truth. So I hired a private investigator. Even now, saying those words out loud makes me feel like someone else. I used to judge people who spied on their partners. I thought relationships either had trust or they didn't. But betrayal changes your morality in strange ways. You stop caring about pride. You stop caring about dignity. You just want reality. The investigator's name was Patricia Wells, mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm voice. She specialized in marital investigations, which somehow sounded both horrifying and deeply depressing. I met her in a small office downtown during my lunch break. I expected her to look judgmental when I explained everything: the secret apartment, the spiritual teacher, the late-night meditation sessions. Instead, she listened quietly and took notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed softly. "You'd be surprised how often people hide affairs behind self-improvement," she said. "Spirituality, fitness, therapy, anything that sounds noble." That sentence stayed with me. Anything that sounds noble. Patricia explained her plan carefully. She would monitor the brownstone during Daniel's usual sessions, identify everyone entering and leaving the apartment, photograph interactions, and determine whether Kira Lawson actually existed. Part of me still hoped this would all collapse into some humiliating misunderstanding. Maybe Kira was 60 years old and running group therapy sessions. Maybe Daniel was emotionally dependent, but not cheating. Maybe there was still a version of my life I could save. The surveillance began the following Tuesday evening. Daniel kissed me goodbye before leaving. "I may be home late," he said gently. "Kira wants to do deeper emotional release work tonight." I nearly laughed at the absurdity of that sentence. Instead, I smiled and said, "Okay." Then I watched him drive away while my stomach twisted itself into knots. Patricia called me just after 11. "Claire," she said quietly, "I think you should sit down." I already knew. I think some part of me had known since the moment I heard that laughter through the window. Still, hearing another person confirm, it felt like being skinned alive. According to Patricia, Daniel arrived at the apartment around 7. He used his own key to enter apartment 2B. 10 minutes later, Kira arrived. She also had her own key. Patricia photographed everything. The moment Kira stepped inside, Daniel pulled her against him and kissed her. Not hesitant, not confused, not guilty. Comfortable. Practiced. Like two people who belonged to each other. Patricia's voice remained professional as she described it, but I stopped hearing parts of her sentences after that. I just stared at my kitchen wall while Sophie's artwork hung beside the refrigerator, and my entire life quietly disintegrated. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia conducted surveillance 3 more times. The pattern never changed. Daniel always arrived first. Kira arrived shortly after. They stayed together for hours. Sometimes they cooked together. Sometimes music played through the windows. Once, Patricia photographed them slow dancing in the kitchen while wine glasses sat on the counter beside lit candles. Meditation. Spiritual healing. Energy work. I almost hated myself for how badly I wanted to believe him before this. Patricia eventually uncovered the lease information too. The apartment was rented under Daniel Harper's name. Kira Lawson was listed as an additional occupant. An additional occupant. Not a teacher. Not a therapist. Not a spiritual guide. A co-resident. When Patricia finally handed me the full report, complete with photographs, timelines, and copies of public records, I couldn't breathe for a moment. The images were devastating in their normalcy. Daniel carrying grocery bags upstairs with Kira beside him. Daniel kissing her forehead outside the building. Daniel laughing on the balcony while she touched his arm. There's something uniquely cruel about seeing the person you love look happy with someone else. Not guilty. Not conflicted. Happy. But the affair itself wasn't even the worst part anymore. It was the architecture of the lie. Daniel hadn't made one bad decision. He had built an entire fantasy. He researched spiritual language so thoroughly that he could explain meditation techniques in detail. He invented emotional breakthroughs. He manipulated me into helping finance the apartment where he carried on his relationship. And every night he came home, crawled into bed beside me, and pretended we still shared the same reality. I started noticing all the small manipulations I had missed before. The way he used words like healing whenever I questioned him, making doubt sound cruel. The way he framed secrecy as emotional growth. The way he implied I was unsupportive whenever I asked perfectly reasonable questions. It was psychological camouflage. And somehow that hurt even more than the cheating. One night, after Patricia delivered the final report, I sat alone in my car outside our house for nearly an hour before going inside. The kitchen lights glowed warmly through the windows. I could see Daniel helping Sophie color at the table, while Lucas showed him something on an iPad. From the outside, we looked like a family. From the inside, we were already ruins. That night, Daniel slid into bed beside me and wrapped an arm around my waist. "You've seemed distant lately," he murmured sleepily. I stared into the darkness. The irony was almost unbearable. "You ever feel like you don't really know someone?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. Then he kissed my shoulder. "I think real love means constantly rediscovering each other." For one horrible second, I wondered if he believed his own lies now. If he had repeated them so often, they became real to him too. I lay awake long after he fell asleep beside me, listening to the steady breathing of the man who had destroyed our life while talking about enlightenment. And sometime around 3 a.m, I realized something terrifying. I no longer recognized the person lying next to me. Once the shock settled into something colder and sharper, I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I had children. Because Lucas still needed braces in a few years. Because Sophie still cried when she couldn't find her favorite stuffed rabbit. Because mortgages, custody schedules, and bank accounts did not pause simply because your heart had been shattered. So, before confronting Daniel, I met with a divorce attorney. Saying the word divorce out loud felt surreal, like I was describing someone else's life. The attorney, a composed woman named Evelyn Carter, reviewed Patricia's evidence carefully. She barely reacted to the photographs. Apparently, affairs disguised as spiritual growth were not as rare as I once believed. "What matters," Evelyn said calmly, "is the financial deception and the sustained dishonesty." She explained that Daniel's use of shared income to maintain a secret apartment could significantly impact a settlement. She also advised me not to confront him immediately. "Gather everything first," she said. "Financial records, savings accounts, credit card statements, insurance information. People behave unpredictably once they know they've been exposed." So for the next week, I lived like an undercover version of myself. I copied tax documents while Daniel showered upstairs. I photographed account statements after he fell asleep. I quietly documented every evening he claimed he was healing with Kira, while Patricia's timestamps proved he was in apartment 2B. And through all of it, Daniel continued performing the role of devoted partner with terrifying ease. One evening, he brought home flowers for me. White lilies. My favorites. "I've been feeling really connected to you lately," he said, while setting them on the kitchen counter. Kira says relationships evolve when both people hold space for emotional truth. I nearly dropped the vase. There was something grotesque about hearing another woman's influence woven into his affection for me. Even his tenderness no longer belonged entirely to us. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning. The kids were at swimming lessons. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and birds outside the kitchen window. Daniel sat at the table, drinking tea and reading one of his spiritual books, the kind with soft watercolor covers and titles about awakening. For a moment, I simply looked at him. 12 years. 12 years of birthdays, illnesses, vacations, inside jokes, late-night conversations, and ordinary Tuesdays. How does someone become a stranger slowly enough that you don't notice until it's too late? Daniel smiled faintly when I sat across from him. "You okay?" I folded my hands together to stop them from shaking. "I know about Kira," I said. The transformation in his face happened instantly. All the color drained from his skin. The teacup froze halfway to his mouth. And for the first time in months, I saw something honest in him. Fear. He set the cup down carefully. "What do you mean?" I slid Patricia's photographs across the table. The image on top showed him kissing Kiera outside the apartment building. Daniel stared at the photo without touching it. Seconds passed. Then a full minute. Finally, he whispered, "How did you get these?" I hired a private investigator. His eyes snapped toward mine, wounded and furious at the same time. "You spied on me?" The audacity of that question nearly made me laugh. "You built an entire secret life. It's not what you think." There it was. The universal anthem of caught cheaters. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. "Then explain it to me, Daniel, because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like you rented an apartment with another woman and lied to me for months." He ran both hands through his hair, breathing heavily like someone trying to solve a complicated equation. Then he said something that would have sounded absurd if it hadn't destroyed my life. "Kira isn't just another woman." I stared at him in silence. "She's helping me heal." Even now, remembering those words makes my stomach twist. Daniel launched into an explanation so elaborate and self-serious that part of me genuinely wondered if he had brainwashed himself alongside me. According to him, Kira was an advanced spiritual mentor who specialized in emotional trauma recovery and masculine energy healing. He claimed she had identified deep internal fractures in him that he had suppressed for years. She helped me see how disconnected I'd become from myself, he said softly. From my emotions, my authenticity.
Authenticity.
The word echoed in my skull like an insult. Daniel insisted the apartment was a healing sanctuary, a protected space where Kira guided clients through transformative emotional work. When I pointed out the kissing photographs, he barely hesitated. Physical intimacy can be part of spiritual healing. I blinked at him slowly. You cannot possibly hear yourself right now. He became defensive immediately. You don't understand this work, Claire. No, I snapped. What I understand is that my boyfriend rented an apartment with another woman and called it enlightenment. Daniel stood and started pacing the kitchen. It wasn't supposed to become secretive like this. But it did. Kira warned me people outside the spiritual process might misunderstand. Oh my God. I actually laughed then. A sharp, broken laugh that startled both of us. You hear yourself quoting her like she's some prophet. His jaw tightened. She helped me become happier. She helped you cheat on your family. That's not fair. Not fair? My voice cracked for the first time. You let me think I was losing my mind for months. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. You wouldn't have supported this if I'd told you the truth. The truth? I repeated. You mean that you were sleeping with another woman in a secret apartment? His silence answered me. That silence hurt more than yelling would have. Because buried inside it was an admission. Then came the part that truly broke something inside me. Daniel sat down again, calmer now, almost pitying. Kira says people often resist spiritual transformation because it threatens their emotional comfort. I just stared at him. She says sometimes relationships have to be challenged before they can evolve. She says, I whispered. He frowned. What? You keep saying, she says, Kira says. Do you even hear it anymore? Daniel's expression hardened. You're reducing something meaningful into something ugly because you're angry. No, I said quietly. I'm angry because you made something ugly sound meaningful. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Really uncertain. Like a crack had formed somewhere inside the fantasy. So I gave him one final chance. I asked the simplest question possible. Do you want this family, or do you want Kira? Daniel opened his mouth immediately, then stopped. That hesitation lasted maybe 3 seconds. But I swear, it rewrote my entire memory of him. Because if someone truly loves you, there is no pause. Finally, he exhaled shakily. I need time to think. Something inside me went completely still. You need time. This is complicated. No, I said. It's actually incredibly simple. He stood again, frustrated now. You're forcing me into an ultimatum without understanding the emotional depth of what's happening. I almost admired the delusion. Even now, even cornered by evidence, he still framed himself as spiritually enlightened instead of unfaithful. Then he said the sentence that ended our relationship forever. I should talk to Kira before making any major decisions. The room went silent. I looked at the man I had built my adult life around and realized another woman now had more influence over him than I did. More than his children did. More than our 12 years together did. And suddenly, beneath all the grief, came clarity.
Cold. Sharp. Absolute.
I stood up slowly. If you need another woman's guidance to decide whether your family matters, I said, then you already made your choice. Daniel looked stunned, like he hadn't expected consequences to sound so calm. But I was past screaming. Past bargaining. Past denial. I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and called my brother. And while folding Sophie's pajamas into a suitcase with trembling hands, I realized something devastating. The man I was leaving behind probably still believed he was the victim in all this. My brother Ethan opened the front door before I even knocked. One look at my face, and he knew something was terribly wrong. He didn't ask questions right away. He just took Sophie's overnight bag from my hand, while Lucas walked silently into the guest room, clutching his backpack. I had rehearsed a dozen speeches during the drive there. By the time I arrived, all I could say was, Daniel's been living with another woman. Ethan went completely still. What? I shook my head weakly. I can't explain all of it yet. But over the next hour, sitting at Ethan's kitchen table while the kids watched cartoons upstairs, I explained everything. The meditation sessions. The apartment. Kira. The lies. The private investigator. By the end, Ethan looked physically sick. That's cult behavior, he muttered finally. At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Later, I realized he was right. That night, Daniel called 14 times. I ignored every single one. Then, the text started. Please come home. You're overreacting. This isn't what you think. Kiera says separation during emotional awakening can trigger fear responses. That message nearly made me throw my phone across the room. Even now, he was using her language, her psychology, her framing. It was like Kiera had rewritten the operating system inside his brain. The next morning, I finally answered one of his calls. Claire, Daniel said immediately, sounding exhausted. Please, let me explain this better. There is no better explanation. You're treating this like a simple affair. Because it is. No, he insisted. What I have with Kiera is emotionally transformative. I closed my eyes. You rented an apartment with another woman. She helped me reconnect with myself. You abandoned your family emotionally months ago. That's not true. Then why did you lie? Silence. I had started noticing something during these conversations. Whenever Daniel couldn't defend his actions logically, he retreated into vague spiritual language.
Growth.
Healing.
Energy. Transformation.
Words broad enough to hide inside. Finally, I said quietly, I'm filing for divorce. The silence on the other end was immediate and absolute. Then came genuine panic. Claire, don't do that. You already did this. We can go to counseling. You already chose someone else. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. There it was. The closest thing to honesty I had heard from him in weeks. Not denial.
Regret.
But not regret for betraying me. Regret for getting caught before he could control the narrative. Over the next month, the divorce process began officially. And that's when the situation became even uglier. Because once lawyers and investigators started pulling at threads, the fantasy around Kiera Lawson began falling apart fast. Her real name wasn't even Kiera. It was Kara Lawson. And she wasn't a spiritual healer. She was Daniel's ex-girlfriend from nearly 15 years ago. When Patricia uncovered that detail, I actually stopped breathing for a second. The woman he claimed had entered his life as some enlightened mentor had been someone he once dated seriously before we got married. Suddenly, everything made horrifying sense. The emotional familiarity. The chemistry. The manipulation disguised as destiny. Kara had resurfaced through a wellness seminar Daniel attended 6 months earlier. By then, she had reinvented herself completely. Online spirituality brand, healing retreats, conscious masculinity workshops, social media videos about emotional awakening. But behind the aesthetic, Patricia uncovered a pattern. Kara specifically targeted emotionally dissatisfied married men. Not lonely men. Married men. Men with stable lives, financial security, and emotional vulnerability disguised as boredom. She convinced them they were spiritually trapped, that domestic life had disconnected them from their authentic selves, that conventional relationships suppressed emotional evolution. Then she positioned herself as the answer.
A guide.
A healer. A woman who truly understood them. And Daniel fell for it completely. Patricia eventually connected me with another woman whose husband had left their marriage after getting involved with Kara 2 years earlier. Her story sounded terrifyingly familiar. Secret healing sessions.
Emotional dependency.
Isolation from family. Language about spiritual awakening. A hidden apartment. Even some of the exact same phrases. He's evolving beyond traditional relationship structures. Society fears spiritually awakened connections. Marriage is just a social construct limiting emotional truth. It was like Kara worked from a script. When I shared this information with Daniel through our attorneys, he refused to believe it initially. She's being targeted because people don't understand her work. I remember reading that sentence in an email and feeling something inside me finally die completely. Because even after everything, he was still protecting her. Still defending her. Still choosing her version of reality over ours. But reality eventually catches up to fantasy. About 2 months into the separation, Daniel started contacting me differently. Less defensive. Less enlightened. More shattered. One evening, he called while I was helping Sophie with homework. His voice sounded hollow. Kara ended things. I said nothing. She says I became emotionally dependent on her. The irony was almost unbearable. Daniel let out a shaky laugh that quickly turned into silence. She says I need to continue my journey independently. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered standing outside that apartment, holding spilled tea in my hands, while he laughed with another woman upstairs. And the sympathy disappeared. What did you expect? I asked quietly. She understood me. No, I said. She studied you. That silence lasted a long time. Eventually, Daniel whispered, I think she manipulated me. The words came too late. Months too late. A family too late. A childhood too late for Lucas and Sophie, who now split their lives between two homes and asked questions neither of us could answer cleanly. Daniel started therapy after that. Real therapy, not spiritual coaching disguised as seduction. By then, though, the damage was irreversible. Trust isn't a light switch. It doesn't magically return because someone finally understands the consequences of their actions. And what haunted me most wasn't even the affair anymore. It was how thoroughly he erased reality to justify it. How he made me question my instincts. How he weaponized emotional language to protect deception. How he made betrayal sound enlightened. The divorce finalized 6 months later. I was awarded primary custody of the children, largely because of the financial deception surrounding the apartment and the instability created during the affair. Daniel received visitation rights and eventually rented a small condo across town. He looked older the last time I saw him at Lucas's soccer game. Not physically. Spiritually exhausted, ironically enough. Like someone waking from a dream, only to discover they burned down their own life while asleep. As for Kara, her online spiritual business quietly disappeared a few months later, after several former clients began speaking publicly about her manipulative behavior. Sometimes people ask if I hate Daniel. I don't. Hatred requires passion, and eventually, I ran out of that. What I feel now is grief. Grief for the man I thought I knew. Grief for the version of our family that no longer exists. Grief for how easily intelligent people can surrender themselves to fantasies that tell them exactly what they want to hear. But I also learned something through all of this. Real love does not require secrecy. Real healing does not isolate you from your family. And anyone who asks you to destroy your life in the name of enlightenment is not trying to save your soul. They're trying to own it.